and this year has been a beautiful experience. I made a lot of friends, and I've met a legend himself. I met, Mr. Norris. He's been helping me out this season because it wasn't easy, but with his encouragement and his diligence, he helped me maintain my level head during the year. So I just wanted to shout him out.
Are you able to level this season in terms of to make a balance about how things were going, taking a look back to the season now that it ends?
You can't be bitter. Most important thing is everybody's safe. Everybody injury-free, and that's the most important thing. These guys can go home and play with their kids. They get a chance to be healthy. So that's the big thing. That's a win in my book.
Finally, 2 questions, 2 topics. First of all, about you. It was your first experience overseas. Globally, one thought, one statement about this first year outside United States.
Yeah.
In terms of basketball and in terms of life. What's wrong, boy? Are you okay? Do you want to stop? Let's talk later.
10-minute pod. 10-minute vid, whatever we're calling this. I broke my rule by even including that Jabari Parker clip at the beginning. Kind of forgot about talking about the Jabari Parker thing, which is not particularly for me. It's not fun to talk about. He popped 6 weeks ago and then maybe 6 months ago, or he's been making more news with his quotes. There was kind of, maybe this is when the Bucks were in the playoffs and it was distracting. I don't particularly like talking about Jabari Parker because it's kind of sad at this point. I think objectively it's sad. Whether it saddens you is another distinction. Maybe some would say it's a distinction without a difference. I think it's kind of sad. There was some quote previously. What was he saying? It was something like, well, John Wall's not in the league, Boogie Cousins not in the league, and I think it was Dwight Howard. I think that those are the names. Whatever the case, to make a controversial statement, you can make a case that Jabari was kind of like the ultimate Buck. He's the ultimate representation of that old loser era. And so there's an affinity for certain people. When Jay, not my brother Jay, when Cool Jay is on the show, I feel like every time he talks about Jabari Parker, there's something about the idea that a lot of us have a degree of nostalgia. Like, Jabari's better as an idea now. He kind of reminds us of what we were before we got signed to the label, what we were like when nobody was checking for us. And so it's, I don't know that anybody spends any time thinking about him, but like there's nothing, like, for a Bucks fan for so long, unbridled optimism is like all that we had. And then to have this guy like Giannis drunk so much of his milkshake in so many ways. Although, that was a slow burn for a while too. But like, Giannis even drunk his milkshake with the inspirational quote kind of stuff, but for a while, like for one shining moment, Jabari Parker previously was the guy saying all the right things. Before he became the guy who was saying the things that made you raise your eyebrow a little bit, before he was the guy saying indefensible things, before he was the guy not getting signed in favor of Ersan, before he was the guy who, where is he? Is he on the Hawks? Is he on the Celtics? So he's out of the league. And the whole thing, Shakespearean, is the, like, it's dramatically, like he's the guy in the movie who's supposed to be the quarterback, but our protagonist, who doesn't know he's our protagonist, actually wins the high school quarterback role. But for this, I just think there's, for a lot of us, so there's that aspect of it, to be sure. And then there's just the basic humanity of your David Thompson, Michael Ray Richardson, Roy Tarpley kind of, I mean, minus the drugs as far as we know, but just the cursed number 2 pick. Like, all number 2 picks seem to be sort of cursed. Just the pick that didn't work. The guy we needed to work, the Tony Mandridge, the Hashim Thabit, just whoever, just that guy. And so when you see him now, like, don't get me wrong, my eyes are dry, but he is so representative of the kind of guy that we were used to rooting for. And like a lot of sort of grifters, Jabari a year ago, 6 months ago, started saying stuff that was basically true, but he wasn't the one to say it. It seemed like he was taking kind of other people's talking points. And actually, you hear this with the clipped aspects of other people's player podcasts, I think, now, where they'll basically just say anything. And so the question is, well, how represent, like, it, people will say, like kind of the bench warmer podcast say something different than the star podcast say different from the guys who are like the All the Smoke, I Want to Be Tough Guy podcast or video cast or whatever you call them. But so that's kind of the one aspect of it. If he's like, he's saying stuff that applies to him. Like, if he says guys don't play defense, like, that applies to him when he was saying they don't pay me to play defense. I think I was on an island saying that I understood with his professional basketball NBA father, that like those guys were like, there's more and more players whose dad was in the league, and those guys were born into the game. And so they look at it slightly differently, but he always seemed to be, and again, I'm not really excusing any of it. Like, I judge him for it, and I can hear somebody's voice in my head saying he didn't take the rehab seriously, he didn't take Suki seriously, he did all this kind of stuff. I think that's generally true, but I just think he was one of us, because we were losers too, right? So the rise and fall of Jabari Parker is the rise and fall of the Bucks fan, and he's in a weird kind of spot too, because that 15-14 win season, 16 win, whatever that one season was, all of those guys, like, you can call that the Giannis era and you'd be accurate. But to me, the Giannis era kind of has to be more associated with Kid and maybe Kid year 2. Or it felt like the Kid, I guess that's not really accurate, but like Kid leading into Budenholzer, obviously he never played for Budenholzer. So it's like this weird afterthought, how like Maravich played for the Celtics real quick, or what's another good one? It's like the Orlando Woolridge kind of well, didn't like the Iceman play Jordan's rookie year, stuff like that, where, you know, it was OJ with the Niners, where it doesn't really feel. So him, at least to me, him and Larry Sanders and some of those guys that were kind of before year 3 Giannis, when like John Henson was still kind of as good as Giannis, or that seems like a different Bucks era. And I think even if you think about like with the Packers, we segment it basically by the Favre era, the Rodgers era, the pre-Favre Mikowski era, the Star era, now the Love era, right? So Favre gets one, Rodgers gets one, but we don't, like, at least to me, you don't sort in your head 30 years of Favre and Rodgers and think of it all as all one blob. It's even though McCarthy had overlap, it's kind of its own thing. And so Michael Redd and Ray Allen and Big Dog is a different segmented area to, like, you know, I think you think from the time the uniforms changed kind of early 90s to like 1999 into 2000 is kind of one era, and then 2000 to 2002 where it all falls apart is one era, and then after they trade Ray it's kind of one era, and then the Ursan, like all those dudes, like the Mo Williams kind of Ramon Sessions era is kind of, I don't know. I'm probably going long on this. I just think. Oh, and I should say too. So Tresky wrote a pretty good article. I think it was paywalled, or maybe it's not paywalled. I actually decided. I asked permission to read it, and I'm actually not going to read it because I think probably people should subscribe and pay him money or do whatever is associated with that. But I didn't really disagree with anything that was said. But there's a basic humanity, a basic cinematic humanity that comes from watching a guy make every wrong decision through narcissism and not understanding and just, I don't even say lack of intelligence, but he just never got it, man. And he's still never getting it. And the tears, at least to me, are representative of this thing that he still, like, he doesn't get it. He understands that he's been laid low, but he still kind of doesn't get it, or he'd be talking about winning basketball. But again, maybe none of that matters if he doesn't get hurt. Like 90% of these guys are super arrogant and super focused on their selfish needs and what they get out of any situation. But he was snake eyes, and he was double snake eyes, and then it was just kind of over. And so it's nothing profound about that. But and this probably dovetails it just real briefly. The Simmons Doc Rivers was on Simmons, and this was circulating. Can we have a doctor? Is there some physical therapist or so? I don't. What is this thing that people say you can't get healthy? You can't get in shape during the year? Because I don't know how that's scientifically accurate. How can that possibly be accurate that you can't get in shape during the year? Like, what does that even mean, that you can't get in shape during the year? Like, what does that mean? That's not true. And if it was true, again, I'm an optimist, and I'm ready to be happy for the Bucs season to start again if we make it to next season. I'll be excited, and there'll be some quotes. Oh, I'm in the best shape of my life. Oh, this and that. And then there'll be dumb tweets like, "Oh, he was worried about his family," or "Oh, this," or, you know, and you got to be in shape, my guy. Like, I do understand the difference between, like, game shape versus jogging shape. what we saw for however many games Lillard played was not really jogging shape. It was, and like Nate Jones or these other people on Twitter, these other people who are like his agents or associates, or I forget who these people were, or ex-agents or ex this or that. Wait, was he an Adidas rep? Something. They're like, well, he always works himself into shape. Like Chris Paul-esque, Shaquille O'Neal-esque. And okay, fine, it didn't work. So maybe this is the year you have to give up sugar and McDonald's and take that next leap. And I'll basically, like, when September comes around, I'll basically be on board because, like, why not believe? I've been predicting a championship the last 2 years, and I still, like, just having a hard time getting over how just embarrassing all of this has been, and how, like, when I tell people I'm a Bucks fan, they chuckle here in the South. Oh, you're a Bucks fan, as the Celtics are about to sweep, and are now probably about the gentleman's sweep. It's like, it's not cool. Like, it's a mulligan for me. But don't tell me you couldn't get in shape during the season. We've done, like, we hear, it's just like lies every day, nothing more but lies, deception, nothing more than lies. Like, we've seen this with Chris, right, this whole time about how long. I thought we all agreed with Chris that they were lying to us, that they were load managing. He's only got so many, like, more 2-inch jumps left to go, and so they're load managing and they're doing all this. Like, we get it, right? But it's the same nonsense with him. It doesn't take 6 weeks to get in shape, especially when you're not playing every other game and all this kind of stuff. You're just not in shape, or you are in shape. But like, whatever it is, it's unacceptable. And I don't want to talk about it, except there's a couple things we should accept. That maybe Lillard never wanted to be here. And also, even more than that, there's not a maybe on this. Like, Doc Rivers is a stone cold liar, right? And anything he says, he'd make a great politician. And everything he says, just be like, okay, that might be, like, sort of true. Even more than, like, some of these other spin doctors. By the way, Darvin Ham's back. Everybody knows that. I don't feel like I have to comment on every little bit of news. But okay, we'll see. And if they were embarrassed or everything, great. And if he's going to work out with Giannis, if Giannis doesn't blow out his knee in Greece doing or Euro basket, whatever that is. I feel like on the take beat, I've never... Trey is both going way out of... Like, the best take is... for 5 years, for 4 years, whatever he's been saying, like, I can't believe we're letting Giannis do this Eurobasket stuff every year. And that's the one he's been pushing that I would say generally he's been right about. And then this bad take just about this constant Drew Holiday thing. Oh, Drew Holiday had a bad game. Well, guess what? They played 4 games. The Celtics won 3 of them. Again, we don't have to pretend. Like, I saw the is Drew a Hall of Famer stuff going on after Game 3. That's dumb. Chris also not a Hall of Famer. Many other people, like the Hall of Famers, are for people who were Hall of Famers. But also, only I am speaking intelligently about Drew Holiday. Really valuable player, and if you have somebody who's blitzing and gambling and bumping you with his hips and doing all this kind of stuff next to a fully armed and operational Giannis, gambling and running around and might block you and decapitate you from behind trying to block your shot. Like, that's a lot for the defense to have to deal with. And if Brook Lopez happens to be standing in the right spot, like, there's a lot that opposing offenses have to contend with the Bucks. Like, we don't have to pretend like he was Scottie Pippen, and we don't have to pretend like he sucks. Like, I think that's fair. So I put the WNBA talk toward the back end. If you're just going to get offended, just punch out now. Like, it's fine. Perhaps you've heard about this WNBA discourse, I would say generally there's stuff on both sides that both sides make some decent points. I probably feel like on some level there's much like Jabari Parker, people will say things that are basically right, but they say things that are basically right kind of for sketchy kind of reasons. But then on the other hand, there's just pie in the sky nonsense, just completely divorced from reality. So again, like everything else, one take, no notes. Here's the thing with the WNBA. The problem with the WNBA, or the situation with the WNBA, is it's a women's league, but nobody really knows what it's for. And like maybe that's cool, but well, look, I'm just gonna talk. Like this is a weird kind of thing I'm doing in my head where I'm trying not to step over things that I've heard other people say. Like I'm inundated with WNBA talk all of a sudden for some reason. I don't particularly care for women's sports. There's only 24 hours in the day. I don't have any animus towards, but some women's sports are a little bit better. I think probably tennis and softball is probably a little bit more entertaining if it has to be on. But I watch a fair amount of sports, but there's only so much time. I don't really even watch the NBA anymore if the Bucks aren't on, and I haven't watched a Brewers game since like that playoffs a couple of years ago. Like there's only so much time. I had an epiphany a couple of years ago. Like, do y'all remember? Do people remember? I think is Liz Cambridge. For those who don't remember, so Liz Cambridge is, as far as I can tell, and just like everything else, we're shooting from the hip. Maybe the details are a little bit off. Liz Cambridge was a brief Twitter superstar in NBA Twitter Spaces, because there would be Twitter pic videos of Liz Cambridge, who was like 8 feet tall. So Liz Cambridge is probably like 6'8". She might be 6'10". Liz Cambridge was huge, and she wasn't unattractive, and she kind of like big and yellow and kind of had almond colored eyes, and so there was kind of this whole meme culture surrounding Liz Cambridge for a while, as she's like posting up 6-foot dudes and laughing at them as they can't stop her because she's shooting over the top. And Liz Cambridge's whole deal, again, as far as I could tell, someone who doesn't watch any of these games, was that I feel like there were Sports Center highlights where it was like she was laughing at people as she was dribbling on them, right? And it was like she gets the ball in the post and she just starts laughing like this is comical. And it was very sort of front-runnery. But for a while, Liz Cambridge had like a Linsanity moment, at least on social media. And I'm guessing you're probably a little bit familiar about this. And no doubt some of you, again, anyone who's listening to this probably can speak way more to all this kind of stuff than me. And then at some point, before Liz Cambridge got canceled for whatever, for dubious reasons or perhaps legit reasons, but Liz Cambridge got canceled at some point. But before that, there was a thing that broke through the news, and it was like the opposing coach, I want to say, called her fat or said she's 300 pounds throwing elbows or something. And it basically was just yelling at the ref like, you can't let her throw her big rear end around. Or it was something like that, like blah, blah, blah. And Liz Cambridge was offended. And I think I don't know if they fired the coach, the opposing coach, but maybe he was fine, but it was something, this was like verboten, right? And like everybody kind of lost their minds, but it was like, again, it's kind of the same thing they're running into now, where this made the media cycle. So is all news good news? Who knows? And I remember thinking, because I've always actually kind of thought this with the UConn coach, it's a little odd when you have men coaches for women's leagues. And at that point, silently, because it's not like, even now, I guess I'm going to say this stuff, but I don't really feel like getting into it. It's just not something that nobody wants to get into. And this is way before the Bill Burr monologue or any of this stuff. But it was just kind of like, all right. And I thought, well, that's interesting. They shouldn't have men. Because people basically either defended her or were silent. Partially because people I don't think, really care. But people were silent on it. And I was like, that's interesting. If they really feel that way, because that's so unacceptable for men's sports. Like, that's the softest of soft things. Like getting it's LeBron getting opposing fans kicked out in Westbrook. Like, it's the wackest, weakest of sauce. But I had a thought that if that's how women really think, that women should be able to see, like, they should have the kind of league that they want to have. If they all feel that this sort of, and again, I'm going to say stuff that's generally kind of pejorative, but whatever kind of league they want to have, women should be able to have. And everybody knows that the problem with the WNBA, as other people have been saying, is that it got born on third base. And even I am not particularly comfortable talking about, well, they don't, people, well, they don't make money, or they this or whatever, or it's this whole thing. The problem, that part doesn't interest me quite as much, whether they're actually profitable. But because the point is not to me so much, like, it's okay if the NBA has a carve out for women's sports and they can afford to invest in the future. Like, that makes sense to me. But the problem with that league being born on third base, it's like there was no inception, or I guess it was baby. There's no conception. The league was not carried. The league was not a toddler. The league was basically just born as a perpetual 8-year-old. It's like, so what is the league? Like, or perhaps a better way to say it. So every single year, like, I like football quite a bit. Obviously, Americans are infatuated with football to a high degree. Just about every year, we hear that somebody else is rebooting the XFL or the USFL, or somebody else is putting together money, and people with money always think that they can make other football work in America. Which means, as far as I can tell, that people like crunch the numbers, and they feel like they can get that whatever network, NBC or whatever network doesn't have football currently, wants back in the game, and they feel like they can get the commercial. Like, they always feel like they can do it, and as far as I can tell, like, it never works. But this is like smart people. This is like people who think they can invest in the XFL, the USFL, or in any of these versions. And so what you see, because there's at least like a profit motive associated with these kind of things. So they're like, okay, we can do this, and we can have crazier rules, or we can be more aggressive, but there's like a plan to it, right? And if the WNBA wasn't, a welfare league subsidized by the NBA, if it was just, hey, there's a little bit of a market, we think, for women's basketball, how are we going to grow this thing? If it was allowed to grow naturally, where people were like, I think we can make some money on this thing if we nurture it in a league of their own style, then just keeping it super real, then from the inception of that league, all sorts of decisions would have had to been made. Which is really, like, what would be a good example? I mean, the biggest one, like right off the jump, are we going to have 9-foot rims and see women dunk? Which I think would just be fascinating to watch. Like, there's enough attitude on the court, allegedly now, from the clips that they show, but what if they were, like, dunking? What if they were disrespectful? Like, what if you could turn on a WNBA game and somebody would spin and dunk two hands and then, like, swoosh her hair back? Like all the other sauce that they have with their layups. But it was something else. But either way, these would be decisions that would have to be made. And again, just being honest, so there would always, again, it's a league of their own. Some people would be kind of selling their attractiveness, their sexual, their sex appeal. People would, there would be an Anna Kournikova of a capitalistic WNBA that was got together by investors. There just would be. There'd be all of that kind of stuff. Again, even as I'm saying this, it's a little distasteful, but this is what would happen. There'd be conversations on how short the shorts would be, what would the uniforms really look like. Even, again, there's so much to say. When you look at their uniforms, all of the uniforms are whack. There's no sense of color. There's no, the colors bleed into each other like it. Obviously, I don't know really what the Indiana Fever looks like. But then when Caitlin Clark got signed, and then it's like, oh, they look like Captain Marvel jerseys. There's like golden, dark blue, and red. And it's like, that's like if you had a league with 8 teams, like do this thought experiment. If you had a league with 8 teams or 4 teams or whatever it is, and you're the commissioner, what would you do? You'd be like, okay, so one has to be, probably have 2 red teams, 2 blue teams. We need a monochromatic, we need an Oakland Raiders team. We need a red and yellow team. We need at least one green and white team. We can have a purple team. But you would lay it out. Like visually, you would have uniforms that made sense. I mean, again, of course, they probably would have all the sponsor patches, just like NASCAR, because they're a fledgling league, right? But all of these would be decisions that would have to be made. Can we have, 4,000 seat arenas? Can we sell those out? Do we all play a couple days a week to maximize? There's all the kind of stuff that would happen from a fledgling league. And these people, like, are we selling apple pie and togetherness and girl next door? Like, what are we selling? How is this profitable? But again, and I find this, I just keep saying, but like, none of that is associated. The ladies who play today are not making a whole lot of money, but like, they're divorced from the profit motive because it's not really about the league being profitable. Even Caitlin Clark, like they observed the women's soccer team fight for more pay or whatever compensation that they got. Well, they leveraged their way into it, or you can say they whined, or you can call it leverage. You can choose like the nice way or the not nice way to say that, but like either way, even that's like not accrued to Caitlin Clark. Like they wind their way into that. Like straight up. So it's not like there's no like Caitlin Clark came in the league and now we got charter flights or something where they could be like, well, I hate that so-and-so, but at least ... No, they just kind of, made a stink and then that happened. And so much dumb dialogue and discourse now about what's a hard foul and what isn't this or what isn't that. But I don't really blame any of them because, again, they should really... I do think they should have like the kind of league that they want to have. But if this is like the kind of league that they want to have, it's never going to be profitable because no one's wearing the white hat. As far as I can tell, it's just a bunch of people. It's just a bunch. And this is where we get into kind of the gender politics of it. It's just, it's just a bunch of angry women. And no one is thinking, oh, we got to get our next bird of magic or any of this kind. It's just not that. And furthermore, if I haven't angered you enough, the problem with... Not even the problem. I'll wrap up after this. But like, what we're basically experiencing now, and for any... I'm willing to believe that a certain percentage of men likes women, likes the WNBA. Like, again, I don't like it when people are doing this thing where they're not as good as the men or they're not this and that. That's a given, but that doesn't matter. What I think a lot of people kind of blanch at, or perhaps a better way to say it is this. So if you generally speaking, and again, we're talking most of the time. I'm talking like 80, 90, 95% of the time. So I'm not really here to address the outliers to what I'm about to say. But if you grew up liking sports as a male, liking sports, playing sports, sports is one of the 5 or 10 things that you use to sort and measure yourself against other boys. That's one of the subconscious draws of everything as a boy trying to become a man. And the women's experience is whatever the women's experience is, but I just don't think I've ever heard anybody say this, that men judge themselves in who hits puberty first, who gets taller first, who can talk to girls the best, who can play video games the best, and yes, and a million other things. But like, who is better at this sport or that sport? Who can bench press the most? Who can do this or that? Like, so there's a reason that men compete against men and women compete against women, because the competition it's not that women are bad at their sport relative to each other, but like for boys especially, like that's not why we're competing. Boys are competing against other men and boys for the affection of women, but that's a different thing. And I don't think, which is also why women prefer men's sports statistically, but again, whatever, like the stuff you like. But I just don't think, if you wanted to have an honest conversation about all of this, because the WNBA and things like this, like, again, there's been a million papers, and like everybody understands demographically, people understand why the Olympics and the Winter Olympics, the Summer Olympics, that people understand the kind of sports that moms like more and soccer moms will like more, and they understand women's gymnastics is more popular. They understand why certain women's sports are more popular or as popular. And because the two genders like different things statistically. But what I don't think has really been expressed is how much, dudes would be having. So the sorting that takes place with young men growing up extends into manhood. And again, it's why Kobe versus LeBron and LeBron versus Jordan and all this kind of stuff, and Bird versus Magic, and people are still having these arguments years and years and years later, because men like to argue about this kind of stuff, because again, it's still sorting. And what happened around the 2010s, and it's whatever, it's cute for men, but you'd be having like some two guys, some Lakers fan and some Cavs fan would be having conversations, and all of a sudden somebody would yell Serena Williams. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. Nobody's talking about Serena Williams. Serena Williams, who's an athlete of the 2000s or whatever. All of a sudden, it became other people. And there's always somebody out of nowhere bringing up Serena Williams or bringing up somebody else. And it was, Michelle Wee. And that became kind of a part of hey, don't forget about the female athlete and whatever we happen to be talking about. And again, that's all basically fine. But that, I would say by and large, that doesn't activate the part of the male brain that was very much into Rafa versus I can't think of the name. Rafa versus the one who looks like Tarantino versus the one who didn't take the shot. It's late. I'm losing my mind on all of this. Serena Williams, like Rocky Marciano. Every time Rocky Marciano, and actually, Ronda Rousey could Ronda, like, all of this stuff came out of nowhere, unorganically, for the perception of people of a certain age. Could Ronda Rousey beat up Floyd Mayweather? Well, what if he couldn't punch? What if this? And again, these things seemed astroturfed to, I would say, a sizable majority of dudes. That all of a sudden, this other manner of dialogue was being forced in there. And so there were bizarre arguments that would take place. And again, I don't mean in the streets. It's probably to be clear. Just on debate shows, or all of a sudden it was like, okay, Tiger Woods, and it's already like a weird conversation to be like Tiger Woods versus Michael Phelps versus whoever the dude was who kept cheating in cycling, Lance Armstrong, and then and it'd be like, but don't forget Serena Williams, or don't forget, and it's just not, and because then it begs other distasteful people who you don't care for, it begs them to be like, well, Serena, again, all this other stuff, like, well, Serena Williams would lose in straight sets to a high schooler, or all this kind of stuff. Then other people have to say, no, the reason they don't watch this is because they're not good at basketball or whatever. Like, and I don't think, like, if you're a big WNBA fan, or if you don't get this conversation, or this conversation is offensive to you, I just don't think I can properly express how much the average guy just didn't want any of this. I don't, like, that's not why dudes watch sports, to have everything turn into some tricked out version of, like, could a man outrun a horse if he had a 20-yard head start, or all this kind of stuff. It didn't seem organic. And all of a sudden it was everywhere. Well, actually, you know what we should talk about? Inside the NBA is wrapping up. And not to do a whole big thing on Inside the NBA, but I think one thing that, again, I'm just going to say the things that people don't normally say. What's the actual takeaway from Inside the NBA all these years? Most people liked it. Obviously some people were bothered by it and couldn't wait to get, JJ Redick and Dorisberg types. Not Jeff, Stan Van Gundy. There's been always a loud subset of people complaining about the inside the NBA. But as I wrap this up, just to make a very obvious point, corporate culture becomes more and more buttoned up and starched and stayed every single year. And so Inside the NBA, which is why it won't survive even if it gets ported over to Amazon. It'll be different now. But for the entirety, or the most of the run, Inside the NBA has been 3 loud black dudes and one guy a white guy who loves them and never checks them. And it's right in front of everyone's face, and I don't particularly think of it that way. I'm guessing you don't think of it that way, but that's what Inside the NBA is. And Inside the NBA has set the tone. It's existed like The View, essentially, for, like, the show that tells people what to think has been Inside the NBA. Inside the NBA is going to tell you what they think about Kyrie when Kyrie does what Kyrie does, or whatever the case is. Like, they're the council, right? They're the high council of the NBA. And so it wasn't, again, I hate even saying this kind of stuff, but it's not 2 of them plus Molly Querim or Joy Taylor or whoever else as talented as some of them may or may not be. This was 3 black dudes, and there's a certain energy from 3 black dudes. And not only was it 3 black dudes, it's a center, a forward, and a guard. It's one of the greatest power forwards of all time. It's one of the greatest centers of all time. And to modulate it, it's a New York point guard who takes more of a backseat, because you can't have 3 greats, and who also play with Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon, so has some pretty good stories. And obviously I don't think anybody's quite a bit of fan of Kenny as the other 2, and obviously sometimes Shaq as a baby, but, like, that's the show. And you can't replicate it because they were just so OC for, like, it's a miracle that they weren't canceled 100 different times, but they caught lightning in a bottle. And obviously Barkley gets, like, the majority of the credit, but, like, that is why the show worked. And I'm saying all this to say, everybody's in this weird space now, because it's like, anytime anybody talks about the WNBA, Stephen A. Smith has just happened to, like, they get their hall pass snatched, right? They get their hood pass snatched to talk about the WNBA. So, like, easier said than done, but there needs to be an inside the WNBA. There needs to be a high council of respected, I don't care who you are, I'm going to say anything, women. That's because they're putting out the policy. They're putting out the policy. There needs to be some function of people who aren't men criticizing Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese or the other one, or talking about Asia Will or whatever it is. But I don't know if those women exist. But that's like the odd dynamic of like kind of women wanting men to talk about them but not wanting men to talk about them, and kind of the whole thing where it's this weird dynamic where they're kind of signaling to a wider audience, but there's no there's no meat and potatoes with it. And I don't really know how to end all of this, except this is bouncing around my head for a while. Let them decide. Like I just feel strongly about this. If they want to bully, like, because that's the thing too. Like if they want to bully Caitlin Clark out of the league, I'm not the biggest fan of the Steph Curry kind of game. Like maybe they want to do that. Like I think either she's going to be good enough to deal with it or not. But either way, like somebody needs to step in. Like, but again, they don't have a real commissioner. Like there's no Davis Stern to be like, what are you doing? You're messing up our Linsanity. It's either going to be Linsanity or it's going to be Steph Curry. It's going to be somewhere in between there, probably. But what are y'all doing? But at the same time, if this is the code, let them have their own code. But again, all of this happened because this thing was fast-tracked when it just probably never could have survived on its own. And that's the weird dynamic that nobody really wants to talk about. You got this league that like needs our help but resents our help. And all of this could be fixed if they just lowered the rim to 9 feet. Because I'd watch that. Anyway, it's late. I'm sure I'm canceled for saying all this. Zip it up, zip it out.